Gentlemen, let me just say, this is John Miller, the general manager.
Where's up?
I want to thank all of you for making yourselves available for this presentation for our community. It's obviously important for as many people as we can reach to be more aware of what we may have to deal with, and we appreciate you taking the time to do that.
All right, so it is, I have 4 o'clock and we'll get started. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We welcome our members who have joined in, and those that will be watching later. Welcome and thanks for attending. On your screen today, we have, I'd like to just introduce everybody, and then after that, they will we'll do some individual Q&A here with them, and then we'll also, can as a member type in the Q&A box if you have a question for one of the participants as we go forward, and we'll get to those either as they come in or after everyone has the time to talk. So with our webinar today, we have Colonel Baxley. He is the Beaufort County Emergency Management Director. So Colonel Baxley, we welcome you. We also have Myron Jordan, who is with the residential side of USI Services. That is the insurance company that Moss Creek has our commercial package with. And Myron, we thank you for being here. And we also have Kevin Dupree with us, who works for Assurant Flood. He's going to give us some updates on the new FEMA flood maps, we hope. So, Kevin, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
So on the call, we have John Miller, our general manager, and I have Jim Albano, our chief of security. So, Colonel Baxley, I'll ask you to unmute, and I'm going to start with you. If as I said earlier, you know, in the last in the last 2 years, we've had around 190 properties transfer in Moss Creek. Already this year, we've had over 35. So we have a lot of new residents moving into our area who've possibly not experienced a named storm or an evacuation. Certainly not since 2019 have they possibly experienced that. You know, if you could just give us some updates as far as local Beaufort County on what is the process for evacuation, when it becomes mandatory, what it's like to try to get back. Just give us some, you know, update on that our membership would find helpful.
Thank you, Suzanne. The most important thing for the membership is that each one of your homeowners, each individual, has a personal plan for emergencies to include not only hurricanes, but all the other threats that face us here in Beaufort County. That would include severe weather, winter storms, tornadoes, earthquakes, and even tsunamis. So we have a tsunami plan here at the Sheriff's Office Emergency Management Division. But this personal plan needs to include, how am I going to get my information? What are my sources of authoritative information? If there is an evacuation ordered, where am I going to go? What am I going to take with me? How long do I plan to stay? And what are my personal reentry plans? So when we start building that plan, we start thinking about first, okay, where am I getting my information from? The Sheriff's Office focuses its information distribution across Nixle, nixle.com. It's a web-based platform, and across Facebook. And then I highly recommend during the tropical storm season, the Atlantic season, that you watch the National Weather Service Charleston Forecast Office, their website, and the National Hurricane Center in Miami, their website. Both of those are the authoritative sources for information on tropical storm systems. You can get a 10,000 or 30,000 foot view from the Weather Channel, but they're not going to focus on Beaufort County. You can read a whole bunch of stuff on the internet that may or may not be good, especially on social media. It may not be valid information. So if you focus on the Weather Service office in Charleston, they'll give you good local information. So then you know you got the storm. We're in the cone of uncertainty. It's a possibility we need to leave. We have the opportunity to leave ahead of time. You can go wherever you want. If you wait until the mandatory evacuation order, which would come from the governor of South Carolina, then you're going to go as traffic volumes increase. We're going to be giving you mandatory directions, and you're going to end up on Interstate 20 somewhere between Augusta and Columbia. You'll hit Interstate 20 depending on which route at a couple of different locations. In South Carolina, we have central authority, and only the governor can order an evacuation. Up here in the Situation Room where I'm seated right now would be the policy group, and that's the sheriff of Beaufort County, Sheriff Tanner, the chairman of county council, the county administrator, the mayors of the four municipalities, and a representative of the command element of the Marine Corps. And we would make recommendations to the governor on what we feel the weather impact is going to be and what actions we feel need to take place in Beaufort County, but only the governor can order the mandatory evacuation. So once he does, you're on the road, you get out of here. Where am I going? That needs to be planned ahead of time. Am I going to a hotel? If so, where? I recommend Atlanta or Nashville. There's enough hotel rooms, there's enough restaurants, there's enough things to do to keep you occupied while the storm is dealing with Beaufort County and we're dealing with it. And then once the storm is over, your other options are to go to friends or family, as long as they're out of the danger zone, or you can stay at a public shelter that's administered by the Red Cross. Now, we have no shelters in Beaufort County. The Red Cross sets the criteria, and there are no shelters in Beaufort County that meet that criteria. So the nearest shelter is at the Jasper High School in Ridgeland. And prior to COVID, it was on track to be able to shelter about 4,700 people, but with COVID, it can only do a third of that. So all of our shelters are in that scenario right now where they're reduced by 2/3. Once the Jasper shelter fills up, we'll open shelters in Hampton, in Allendale, in Barnwell, and Bamberg. And if those all fill up, then we have shelters in the upstate in Greenwood and Greenville, Spartanburg, and Anderson that can open to support us. We've never had to do that before. We've never gotten that far where we had to do that, but that is the plan. So am I going to stay in a shelter with 500, 600, 700 of your closest friends, or am I going to a hotel, or am I going to friends and family? Once all that's decided, then you go, you get out of here. What am I taking with me? You need to take your mortgage and homeowners papers, your insurance forms, contacts for your insurance folks. I'm not going to steal their thunder. You need to take your medicines. You need to update them. You need to take some ready cash, because all of this stuff is computer based, and it's possible that the networks will fail at any place along the coast where the storm impacts. And that could be a very wide area, and you might have difficulty refilling a prescription or accessing your bank accounts for a limited period of time if the networks have failed. So carry some ready cash, carry your prescriptions updated, carry your important papers, and then get out of here. Once you're out of here, you're waiting, you're watching, you're keeping track through the Facebook and the Nixle of the Sheriff's Office. Again, the National Weather Service, and that's not the Weather Channel, the National Weather Service Forecast Office in Charleston. And also through local media such as Channel 11, Channel 28, Channel 3, those local TV stations that cover Beaufort County. They will give you Beaufort County centric information. Once we announce out of this office that we are allowing reentry into Beaufort County, it's a tiered reentry system. Search and rescue is first, and then critical personnel to support search and rescue and restoration of government come next. And then key individuals such as pharmacies and grocery stores and places like that have been predetermined, they come next. And then the citizens, the property owners, the homeowners, all of this, the non-resident homeowners, they come after that. And then beyond that is the general public who has no real ties to Beaufort County. They just want to come in and see what happened. There will be information on social media that will contradict what we're putting out. So it's important that you get your information from us, especially as to reentry. We don't want you sitting at roadblocks out at the county line because someone on Facebook saying, okay, it's good to come back, and it wasn't. So make sure that you validated that information through us, that it's safe to come back. Then once you come back, what are you facing? Probability of no electricity, possibly no running water, no sewer lift stations. Roads could be blocked if we've had a catastrophic hit. Roads could be blocked. You might have to park 2 or 3 miles and walk to get home. You may get home to no electricity. No sewer system, no running water. It may stay that way for a while as the infrastructure is repaired. The power companies tell me that it could take in a category 3 scenario, which is wind only. Keep that in mind. The categories are for wind only. that in a Category 3 scenario, it could take 30 days or longer to restore power to 90% of the county. So it could very easily come home to, let's say we open it back up 7 days after the hit was, all right, folks, residents, homeowners can come home and survey your property, but we have no electricity, we have no running water. You come home to it, you say, well, they'll fix it. We will, but it may take 30 days to get fixed. That's very important to understand. How am I going to deal with that? Most of us are not capable of dealing with 30 days of no electricity. I mean, that's a pretty primitive type situation. When the governor gives a mandatory order, it has the weight of law. You are required by law to leave. If you choose to stay, number one, you're making a very foolish decision in the light of the best evidence available. And number two, there will come a time when there will be no resources available to help you. We will send all of the emergency services to a safe shelter, and they will remain there until such time as it is safe to return to the roads. Depending on the length of the storm, that could be 3 or 4 hours, that could be 16 hours, depending on the length of the impact of the storm. And then we'll get back out and start working our way back out into the community. So it's very important. If you stay, if you make that decision, you're on your own. And you may have to deal with anything from a tree falling through your roof and falling on you or a family member and breaking their leg, to a heart attack, to rising water coming into your home, to critters coming into your home. A lot of things you'd have to deal with if you choose to stay. So it's smart to have a plan, have all your stuff in order, get out, and then follow the authoritative sources. How's that for answering your question?
Well, thank you, Colonel Baxley. And if anybody has any questions on what Colonel Baxley has said, just please put them in the Q&A. And as we go through the presentation, we will pop some of those out. We certainly, and I know Jim Albano does, certainly work close with the sheriff's office during evacuations, during reentry, not only with our staff, but also security wise. So
I'd like to say that without the assistance of the security companies at the various communities, we could not get the job done. They bring a strong augmentation to our sheriff's office force, and we do work very closely with them, not just during hurricanes, but on day-to-day operations. And again, without those folks in place, we could not get the job done.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So now I'm going to introduce Myron Jordan with USI Insurance Services. And Myron, if you want to give us some information on what you do and possibly some good information for our homeowners to understand about their insurance during these type of events.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So again, my name is Myron Jordan. Private risk advisor with USI Insurance Services. And so our goal is really working with our clients from on the front end before storms ever hit, just kind of really managing the risk, knowing what they've got out there, and then kind of answering questions along the way to make sure that the right protections in place. So when something does happen, we've got coverages in place that we shouldn't have any questions about as far as is my stuff covered. A lot of the clients we deal with from a wealth planning standpoint and wealth awareness standpoint, when we start to talk about putting together these checklists, we're talking about things that a lot of times they don't really think about it. So we're talking about, being prepared for having no electricity, maybe installing some backup generators to have on site. A lot of artwork, a lot of wine collections, things like that we see from an insurance standpoint. Well, we kind of go ahead and set the stage to make sure they've got a way to get these assets protected, get them off island if they need to, or get them to the higher ground if they need to. And we work with local movers and people we need to bring in to help protect these assets as well to get them off site. One of the things that kind of, I think Colonel was talking about is being prepared as far as making sure you got your list. And, I've done it before where we have gone off and I have 2 dogs and I've got a dog that's on medication. And, that's important, not only grabbing your medication, making sure you've got excess medication on site for your animals, making sure when they go with you, they've got their stuff that they need, their food, their supplies, because, they've got nowhere to go and we don't want to leave them behind. I mean, we hear the horror stories of what happens when animals are left behind as well. And then, just understanding the insurance policies that are in place, whether it be flood, whether it be primary flood, whether it be excess flood, there's private market flood out there. and your homeowner's insurance. And what typically will happen, and and Kevin can talk about it as well, is when claims happen, a lot of times, depending on the carrier, whether it be a surplus lines carrier or even sometimes the admitted carriers, they try to bring in a single adjuster to get somebody out there because, rising waters, we know it's from a flood standpoint, we can see rising waters. When you have hurricanes coming in, wind blowing, trees falling, it takes a special individual, and I'm not that person. And, we've got to bring in the specialist to go in there and say, okay, how much of this damage is caused due to wind? How much of this is caused due to rising waters and flood? So they've got to bring somebody in there from an engineering standpoint to really distinguish what is going to be covered from that standpoint of a flood or the standpoint of the wind or the hurricane. And there's different deductibles you have to understand along the way as well, whether it's a named storm deductible, whether it's a hurricane deductible, or a wind and hail deductible. And there's three different, if I had my druthers, I'd always choose to have the hurricane deductible. If you have a named storm deductible, any name that is associated with a storm, that deductible is going to be applied at time of loss on your homeowner's piece. And then if you have a wind and hail deductible, that just means anytime the wind blows, whether it be a tropical storm, whether it be a bad tornado, anytime the wind blows, you're going to pay those higher deductibles with a wind deductible. And then, so it just really depends on understanding the policies that are in place. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions around, specifics, and we can try to answer some of those questions. I don't want to get, it depends on what people's wanting to know as far as the how things work. And there's a lot of questions around flood insurance and can we buy excess flood insurance? And, you can get coverage through FEMA. 250 is the max we can get on structures. 100,000 is the max we can get on contents. We can go out to markets and buy excess flood above and beyond the FEMA. And there's also private market flood, which allows us to go in there and tailor a policy specific for the amount of coverage we need, where we don't have to involve the FEMA policies. Every case is going to be different, and it really depends on the specific structure, the way it's built, and everything that relates to that specific account, what's going to be in the best options. And it's kind of, don't want to get too thick in the weeds, but I think it'd be, from my standpoint, the Q&A is probably going to be where we can provide more information, I think, specific to some of the questions that may come up. Because a lot of times we get to talking and it's not what they want to hear. It's more like, this is what I want to know. So as I ask for questions. So I think that's kind of an overview, and then we can fill in the blanks around any of it going forward.
Okay, so again, please put your questions, and at the bottom of your screen should be a Q&A. Just click on that, type in your question, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Kevin, you are a flood expert, I guess, flood insurance expert. And, we've had a lot of questions here from our homeowners. What are the new flood maps mean? What does it mean in my area? Have they been permanently approved? Can the county change those a little bit? How does that affect me? How does that affect my current flood insurance? A lot of people have been getting credits back on their insurance. What does all that mean? Can you give us a little update on that?
Great question, Santa. A little historical background about the federal flood program, also known as the National Flood Insurance Program. It basically came into being in the late 60s, voluntarily offered the program to specific communities. It's grown from a handful of communities to 23,000 approximately today. For Hilton Head itself and much of coastal South Carolina, they came into the program in the late 1970s. I believe Hilton Head in particular in 1977. With that introduction into the program, the various communities that once they joined agreed to some specific minimum requirements that FEMA or the NFIP mandate. And a lot of those requirements have to do with how buildings are constructed, how they're renovated. And a lot of that also deals with the type of foundations they have and the actual zone that the properties are located in. And I think that is really what's germane to the recent remapping. In your community specifically, it's been mapped 5 times since joining the program in 1977. And each one of those remappings or mappings have taken in consideration growth, buildings being built and renovated, infrastructure improvements, changes within the community itself and zoning, and just basically overall what has been done to mitigate flood losses and potentially what has been done to increase flood losses. So recently, a new map was introduced in your community, specifically in Hilton Head. I believe that was March 21st of this year. And with that introduction, some locations actually went from what they call special flood hazard areas or high-risk areas, which are normally known as A as in A zones. And the most hazardous of all are V as in Victor, V zones. And some of the A zones actually went to what they call non-special flood hazard areas, traditionally known as B as in Bravo zones, C as in Charlie zones, or X as X-ray zones. Now, with that change, if you were mandated by your lender to maintain flood insurance, those mandates often are no longer required once you go from a high-risk flood zone to a low to moderate risk zones, which we know today as X zones. Just a little statistic though, from FEMA, 20 to 25% of all flood claims occur where? In those non-special flood hazard areas, those low to moderate risk areas. So having lived in Charleston and now in the South Carolina side of Charlotte, North Carolina, I'm in the Piedmont area today, and before that I lived in the Low Country. There's a reason why they call it the Low Country. It's because it's susceptible to flooding from various different sources. It doesn't have to be a storm. And one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about the federal program, the NFIP, is if it meets the definition of a flood, it's a covered event. A covered event could be someone backing into a fire hydrant at the end of your cul-de-sac and causing a flooding event. It doesn't have to be weather related. So the definition of a flood is pretty broad within the NFIP. So I just share that because so many folks, when they do go through a remapping, and it's a favorable remapping, and they're no longer mandated to carry flood insurance, they often let their policies go. You know, obviously that's a personal decision, but knowing that the statistics are such, and the fact that we live in South Carolina, which I believe is the second smallest state, southern state, and we have a significant coastline, and we have a significant amount of rainfall, and we all know how much growth we're experiencing in South Carolina, no matter whether it's in the Piedmont area, the upstate, or Low Country. Flooding events happen, and they'll continue to happen. Now, with the remapping, there were some accounts or some properties that went from the low risk areas, the BC and X zones, or more notably known as X zones, to A zones in particular. And in those particular cases, those folks are now or already have received letters from their lenders saying, by the way, you have a loan with us under the federal banking laws and mandates, you need to carry a flood policy. And that's where you would reach out to your local insurance agent. Not drop any names here, but we have Myron on the phone on the meeting. But the remapping itself is something that occurs periodically. It takes into account a number of different factors. I know that in January, much of Charleston was remapped. You got Charleston has spent hundreds, if millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 30 years in infrastructure improvements. And with those infrastructure improvements have come better floodplain management. And as a result, a lot of areas there are now in the low to moderate risk areas of flooding. Keeping in mind though, floods occur anywhere and everywhere. And in some cases, we've had instances in some years where every state within the union have incurred a flood event. So that's kind of a treetop overview of why there is remapping and why communities' zones change over time. And that's a cooperation between the local community, the state, and FEMA. And ultimately, it's there to benefit the citizens and protect the communities in which participate in the flood program. Hope that helps.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to a couple of questions that we've had come in. This is from David Furman. What is the advice on turning off water at the street? And I'm assuming he means his at his home. That, you know, I'd say probably all of our homes have property owner valves. So we certainly would suggest that if you are leaving and you have concern that you're not going to get back, to turn your property owner valve off, so that in the event of anything, and I'm sure you guys agree with that, you insurance guys agree with that, that you should do that upon leaving your property.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on that, I mean, even from a standpoint of taking a vacation, I mean, when I go on vacation, I go at least twice a year. I'll take off for a week to a week and a half. I go in my garage and hit my main water valve and cut it off, just from the standpoint, because if something happens while I'm gone, you're going to have a massive water claim anyways. So I would get in the habit of doing that, period.
So the next question comes from Lynn Greeley. If we're out of town during an upcoming hurricane, send someone at Moss Creek come turn off our water. And certainly if you get in touch with us, we can see if we can have the personnel to go out and do that. The next question, Jim Albano, I'm gonna ask you to unmute. The next question is for you. What kind of on-site security is provided at Moss Creek during a mandatory evacuation? Are our properties well protected from looting and other risks?
It's a very good question. It depends on the severity of the storm. I would echo Colonel Baxley's remarks about departing. And the less personnel we have on property, the easier it is for us to protect. It's just going to depend on the amount of storm that we receive. If I have the personnel to be able to patrol on a frequent basis, we will do that. But I think it's just going to depend on the severity of the storm and the amount of personnel that we're going to have on property to do that.
And Myron, a question that we get often, and I got it the other day, what happens, and you know, with storms and hurricanes, a lot of times there's tree damage. So if my neighbor's tree falls on my house, or my neighbor's tree falls across the property line, who's responsible for that?
Well, the unfortunate answer is it's going to be your own insurance company. There is a very gray area where we've been able to go back in situations that's not been storm related, but it's been just, you know, thunderstorms in the afternoon where there's been documentation that there's a tree that's dying, there's an issue with it. You have asked your neighbor about it. You've had to send a certified letter. You have to have the documentation to go with the complaint in order for that other person's individual coverage to kick in and take care of it. 99% of the time, it never happens, and it's going to be your own insurance company taking care of the trees. And keep in mind that most companies, there's limitations when it comes to tree removal and debris removal. And so, depending, when we do a lot of houses on islands and these resort areas, there's a lot of times we will actually, within the policy language, we'll go in and endorse additional coverages for shrubbery and things like that, because there's a lot of money that's put into trees and shrubs on property. And we want to make sure that that is covered. Now, that's something that's not going to be covered specific through a flood. Flood policy doesn't cover that, but if you've got the endorsements on there, we can get coverage for that. But if your neighbor's tree falls in your house and damages it, it's going to be your insurance company.
Okay, I've had an additional question come in. This comes in from Doug Hanslip. As hard as the FEMA map is to read and determine which zone one's home is in, could Kevin or Myron send MCOA a clear map of just Moss Creek?
I mean, I'll respond and let Kevin respond as well. They use these overlays, and for me to pull it up on the system and see it, it's really kind of hard. I do have the availability to go in by address and run a flood zone determinator specific to an address and can figure out exactly what flood zone it's in. If it comes back where it can't be determined immediately, it takes sometimes 24 hours, where the carrier, depending which carrier we're using, can do an overlay and a study real quick to get more specific and then come back and give us those determinations. And there's a lot of times that you may see when you look at these maps, you may have your property line sitting in an A zone, but the physical house, the structure may be in a, like you were saying, a B, C, or X zone. But when they look at that, they're going to go, if your property line's touching that, let's just call it the A zone or the VE zone, it's going to take the higher of the rating when it comes to flood policies. Kevin, anything you want to add to that?
In response, on FEMA.gov, they have obviously a lot of different resources, but there's also a link to flood insurance. And FEMA has provided in the past what they call a fermet, which is an overlay.
I think Kevin has froze.
Yeah, he was talking about a ferment, and there's overlays that they'll go and do, but I think he's frozen.
So really the best thing is for you to reach out to your insurance agent who has the ability to really do a deep dive into where your property lays on the map and what your proper insurance should be, correct?
Right. I mean, they can run those flood zone determinators. And like I said, if it's a situation where, everything changed in March, and let's say by the time they get to you, it's May, June, or July, and they say, okay, you've gone from an A zone to now you're a B zone where you're in a preferred rating. They're going back to the renewal date of that policy and giving the refunds back out to insureds. But at the end of the day, let's say you're paying XYZ for an A-rated flood policy that is in, at the time, a non-preferred zone, and then you get rezoned to a BC or X where it's a preferred zone. You're going to see a nice return on your premiums, but the new annualized premium we're seeing, those are typically $400 or $500 a year. I'd stay in the mindset of that $400 or $500 a year. Just makes sense not to cancel those flood policies. I mean, and I don't know if Kevin will get back on or not. We've seen situations, and it's no secret. I mean, the issue's been, if you go back to 2008, 2009, when the Bigger Water Act was kicking in, they were trying to change everything in the FEMA, in the flood world, where they were mandating everybody go out and get elevation certificates, because anything that was built pre-firm before 1974, you didn't need the elevation certificate. So it just got a pre-firm rating. And the only way that you're ever going to get your flood policy rate adequate is to go out and get an elevation certificate. What happened was when they started mandating that, all of a sudden you couldn't sell homes anymore. People who had these historical properties here in Charleston couldn't sell the houses because they were having to go out. People who had flood insurance that was costing them $5,000 to $8,000 a year on pre-firm rates were being required to get elevation certs, which are now showing negative elevations. And overnight, the flood policies were going to $25,000, and they couldn't sell properties, which requires it. So it was one of them things that, you know, now that they're going back and making these adjustments, it just, we see too many flood claims. Like you said, 25-30% of these claims are in the BCX flood zones that are considered the preferred zones. And it just doesn't make sense to cancel flood policies.
Yeah, let me pivot off of what Myron shared. And I sorry, apparently the connection got lost here. When you go to the FEMA website and you look into flood, one of the first things you'll see is that FEMA has a specific statistic that 1 inch of water in your home can cost up to $25,000 worth of damage. That's just 1 inch. And what we don't realize that if you have a category 3, you potentially could have as much as 6 inches of water, and you don't have to be necessarily on the coast. You could be inland a half a mile or so. So flooding itself, whether it's weather related or it's another particular cause, is something that happens frequently. And additionally, with the fact that the terrain we have in the low country of South Carolina, there's a lot of potential, what they call ponding, or some people call it a lake effect, where when you accumulate a lot of water, whatever the source, that water basically doesn't quickly evaporate. It doesn't quickly sink into the soil. It potentially can cause just kind of a large pond that encompasses a number of properties, whether they're vacant properties or they are undeveloped lots or a particular home. So, you know, again, it's a personal choice whether to maintain your policy or not, but the fact that we have the terrain, the topography that we do, it's a risk that personally, from my perspective, I keep my flood insurance up and going.
I have one more question. One of you gentlemen had talked about excess flood insurance and being able to purchase that. What is the estimated cost per thousand of excess flood? And do you recommend more than the FEMA 250,000 coverage if your home is not elevated?
Well, Myron, let me share something there, and then I'll let you pivot off of that. Any type of flood insurance, whether we're talking excess or private, not the NFIP, but excess and private, is going to be dependent upon the actual exposure. Now, even FEMA has higher rates for what they call V zones, as in Victor, than they do A zones, because V zones are normally ocean front and they're impacted by velocity of waves. The same thing kind of plays into excess coverage and private coverage. If you own a $1 million home replacement cost and you have a NFIP policy that is capped at $250,000 and you have a $500,000 loss due to flooding, can you afford that additional $250,000? And that basically comes back to a personal decision. But oftentimes we find, and one interesting tidbit is just 10 years ago, you may have had 30 carriers writing private insurance and offering excess. I saw a statistic that was in the Insurance Journal, May 25th of 2021, that says we have upwards to about 170, 180 different carriers now filling that particular space, either writing from $1 or writing excess coverage or above the NFIP. So Myron, you want to step in there because of your piece?
Yeah, I mean, so as far as trying to figure out the rate per hundred, that is impossible. But it's a situation where, like you said, every single house is going to be, from a rating standpoint, it's going to be different. When it comes to looking at the excess flood limits over FEMA, typically that will be a Lloyd's play when it comes to a standalone excess flood policy. And you have the availability to write that coverage from 100% insured to value all the way down to 1%. Now, typically what we like to do is if you've got, let's say you got a $500,000 or $1 million house and you've got 250, and then you want to look at excess flood coverage. We're going to automatically run quotes for the building structure at 25, 50, 75, and 100% insured to value, above and beyond that primary 250 layer you're going to get through FEMA. We can also look at doing the same thing when it comes to contents. And then we're going to have a conversation around, once we get the rate structure back on the excess flood, then we kind of sit and think about, okay, look at the proximity to water. Are we talking, storm surge? And if it's strictly a flood loss, take the hurricane portion out of it. So now we've got to have just a flood loss. What's the probability of having a complete loss due to just flood? And does it make sense to go to 100% insured to value? So that's one of the ways we kind of look at how much coverage do we want to put in place and what are we willing to self-insure for? And then the same situation is if it is due to a hurricane, you're going to have the rising waters, plus you're going to have the storm surge, and then you're going to have, if the roof's ripped off the house and rain's pouring in, that's not going to be considered flood. That's going to come under the homeowner's portion with the hurricane. Flood's got to be the rising water. So very seldom are we going to write 100% ITV on the excess flood unless it's unless it's a property sitting right on oceanfront property. When it comes to looking at going to private market flood, a lot of times we can go first dollar and write those same limits up to, and we got some carriers that will go up to almost 5 million on full value, depending on what we truly need. The difference is, and I believe that most of the mortgage companies today are accepting the the private market flood policies. I personally haven't run across any of them that's not accepting it. And there's a little bit of variation differences between, a waiting period. So, if you're buying, let's say you're buying a house cash, and this particular house does not have flood insurance on it, and you're going to go through NFIP, well, especially during hurricane season, once you close, you got a 30-day window before that policy goes into effect. With private market flood, we can take that window down to 10 days. It's just, and then there's other coverages in the private market flood. We can get coverage for loss of use that you can't get through FEMA, and we can also get coverages for pools floating up and floating away that we can't get through a standard NFIP policy. But the rate structures are a little different. Sometimes the private market is going to be a little more expensive because they are giving bells and whistles, and then sometimes they're just going to come in and they're going to be a lot more reasonable. Every case is going to be different. There is absolutely no rhyme or reason. I literally have houses that are next door to each other, and we've got a policy with NFIP and excess flood through Lloyd's. And on this house, we have it all through one provider on a private market flood. There is no rhyme or reason. Every case is looked at differently, and it's all going to be on a submission basis and for the underwriter to go through it. And it will change daily based on what's happening in the Lloyd's market and what the syndicates are doing and how much exposure that they're picking up on a daily basis. So that's constantly going to be changing.
With the Myron, with the rising cost of construction and the rising cost of materials, have you had a lot of concern from your clients of maybe the value of their homes, or are they carrying enough insurance?
Yeah, the biggest question comes up is, and it's kind of a double-edged sword, because you got when people are shopping their insurance, they're on the phone. I think, my house is insured for X amount of dollars. I can never sell it for this amount. Well, you're absolutely 100% correct, because when an insurance company is looking at replacement costs, they've got to look at what it's going to cost to rebuild that structure back with today's cost. There may be some ordinance or laws that have kicked in now they have to go in and make some adjustments for. And they've got to, and they're under the contract required to make you whole. So there are some carriers that will put 125% replacement cost built into their policy. Some are 150%. Pure is a prime example. Pure, if you have a homeowner's insured with Pure and it's a fire loss and it's a total loss, it's up to 200% replacement cost. But if it's a hurricane, it backs down to the typical norm in the market of 150%. And what happened was, if you go back pre-Hugo, in South Carolina, we used to have guaranteed replacement costs. So if you had a home insured for $500,000 and it was a total loss and it cost $1.5 million to rebuild, it was rebuilt. There was a guarantee. There was no cap on it. Well, when Hugo hit, all that changed. So it went, typically what we see now in South Carolina is extended replacement cost up to 150%. And that's typically the norm. North Carolina, some states, we can still get the guaranteed replacement cost. But the biggest thing is understanding that replacement cost for structure has got no impact bearing whatsoever on what you're going to sell that property for or what the market value is. And that's some of the hardest conversations, because the mindset is, well, I can't get that for my house if I go to sell it today. And it depends truly if it's a buyer's market or seller's market, but neither one of those have impact whatsoever on replacement cost for structure. And so the carriers that we represent, and even your Main Street providers, your State Farm, Nationwide, all states, a lot of those carriers, they're working with contractors on an annual basis. They're going to seminars. They know what the cost is per square foot to rebuild. I mean, we're seeing right now on the Hilton Head, Bluffton market, even at Kiowa, Seabrook, $350 to $400 a square foot replacement cost on new construction. That's right in line with what's going on right now. And what we see typically is most houses that we get involved in, I'd say 95% of the time, they're underinsured. And when you look at a total loss, whether it be due to a hurricane or due to a fire, when a carrier has a total loss on a homeowner's policy, 99% of the time that home's underinsured. It's just the way it is.
Colonel Baxley, I have a question for you. Can you let us know, I know prior to possibly Matthew, I think there was some change, but is there a state law or some type of law that requires a hotel to accept you with your animals, even if they are a no animal or no pet hotel? Is there something that, does that change during hurricane evacuation, that hotels are required to accept you with your pets?
Not in South Carolina. There has been a cultural change among hotel management to accept more and more pets. You're seeing more and more hotels on a daily basis accepting pets. And during hurricane evacuation situations, some hotels will open to pets, but that is an individual manager decision. There is no law in South Carolina addressing it.
And also, could you let us know at what point does Beaufort County decide to put the either close the bridge to Hilton Head or decide to change the traffic routes on 278 so that they're 4-lane going out versus any coming in? Is that is that determined by the type of storm and the evacuation plan?
Okay, let's address the bridges first. We do not close the bridges. Nature closes the bridges when they just make it simply unsafe to cross them. That is the very first call that we get. A storm gets named. Bill got named at 8 o'clock this morning. I promise you, someone somewhere in this county said, "When's the sheriff's office closing the bridge?" We do not close bridges. The other situation, there are 2 reversal plans. We have worked many, many thousands of hours with the South Carolina Highway Patrol, South Carolina Department of Transportation to create evacuation plans that include counterflow and full lane reversal to maximize the amount of asphalt that we have available. And we will only do that when the traffic volume dictates that we need to do that. And there will never be a situation, well, I can't say never, but it's not in the plan to have a situation where there are 4 lanes off of Hilton Head and nothing coming on, because we have to move emergency vehicles and logistical supplies onto the island. So there is a reversal, a counterflow plan that would begin at the Spanish Wells intersection to accommodate the cross island traffic. And it would put traffic in the, what we call the number 1 lane, that's the lane closest to the median, in the opposing direction across the bridges until we get to Moss Creek, and then we would put it all back on the proper side. Once we expanded 278 to 3 lanes on either side, there was no reason to continue a counterflow situation on the mainland in Bluffton, because we would have nowhere to put them when we get to the termination point. By putting all the traffic on the westbound side, utilizing all 3 lanes, we peel 1 lane off at McGarvey's onto 170. Then we peel the next lane off at I-95 North, and then the final lane goes on to 278 West towards Hampton. And that is an efficient flow of the traffic. If we were to put anything in the counterflow side over there, we'd have nowhere to put them. So that's the situation we have in Southern Beaufort County as far as that. And we only implement that. We prepare to implement it with every named storm. If the governor orders a mandatory evacuation, we have the resources in place to implement the counterflow, but we will not do it until the traffic volume requires it. And we're monitoring it minute by minute through the traffic management system and all of our cameras and the officers and supervisors on the ground. And as they see that volume rising, then we'll implement the reversal and the counterflow plans.
I have another question for you, Colonel Baxley. If one leaves early enough, are certain high traffic routes like I-95 mandated to be taken, or can one go back roads north?
If you leave before the governor's mandatory order, you can go in any direction you want to on any road you want to. Once the mandatory order takes place, we begin to very closely monitor the traffic volume, and it's a high probability that we're also absorbing evacuation traffic from North Florida and from the state of Georgia. At that point, the Highway Patrol, the Beaufort County plan ends at the county line, but it blends into the state plan. And the state plan is 7 parallel routes across South Carolina that encompasses the southern conglomerate, which is Beaufort County and our bordering counties, the central, which is Charleston County, anchored on Charleston, and the upper, which is anchored, the northern, which is anchored on Horry County. And we have 7 parallel routes that all terminate at Interstate 20. And once that traffic volume reaches the saturation level and then starts to go beyond it, those plans are in place, and you will be forced to go on the route that you're currently on. And that will depend literally on what lane you're in on 278. And you might end up on 995 North, you might end up on 321 North, or you might end up on 278 West, but you will eventually reach Interstate 20.
I have another question for you, Colonel Baxley. If someone decides not to evacuate, what should they have in their home? And I'm sure that depends on also the length of possibility of food supply. But the question is, what do I need to have on hand in my home if I'm not evacuating?
The governor's mandatory evacuation order carries the weight of law. So if you choose, and I said earlier, that's a very poor decision if you choose to stay. You are taking on all of the risks on yourself. You are taking on the probability of someone getting injured in your home. How are you going to deal with that? There will come a point in time during the storm when all emergency services will terminate. We will all take our personnel and our resources to safe shelter so that they are preserved for after the storm. And we cannot negotiate. We can't cross the bridge to Hilton Head in high winds. It simply cannot be done. We cannot cross the causeway if it's inundated with water or has been washed out due to inundation during the storm. We cannot drive down a highway if trees are falling across it. So there'll come a point where there's no resources available to respond to you. So you're taking on the decision of staying in your home and riding out the storm and being able to deal with medical emergencies, whatever they might be, from a tree falling on you and breaking a leg to a heart attack or a stroke or some other various life-threatening situation. You're dealing with wildlife coming up into your home, alligators, snakes, raccoons, coyotes, all the things that live in nature here in Beaufort County. They're seeking high, dry ground, and your home might be it, depending on what zone you're in that Myron was talking about. They're going high and dry. You're dealing with a lot of other, you're dealing with no power, no electricity. What if you sleep on a CPAP machine, or what if you have to have some type of other medical equipment that requires electricity and the electricity goes out during the storm? What if you need dialysis and the dialysis clinics are closed and they don't have power, this sort of thing. So the decision to stay is a very poor decision. And the only advice I can give you is that if the governor orders mandatory, that is based on the absolute best evidence, best scientific meteorological evidence available, and you need to go.
So that is great information, because we always have people who decide to stay. The member who asked that question clarified that her question is not if I decide not to evacuate. The question is if we are not evacuated. I think concerned about if we're not evacuated but a storm's coming, are there things that they need to have in their home to be prepared?
I'm trying to imagine a scenario where a storm would be threatening us and we're not, and the governor does not order the evacuation. I've been doing this for 37 years and I have not seen that scenario occur. So it's kind of hard to imagine that. But the same thing, that this goes back to your personal plan. If we had a tornado strike Beaufort County today, and those do happen, or an earthquake strike Beaufort County today, and those are within the realm of possibility, what would I need to survive that? You need a potable water supply, and the recommendation is a gallon of water per person per day. That's just drinking water. You need first aid supplies, and I'm not just talking about Band-Aids, but I'm talking about first aid supplies that you can deal with bleeding or respiratory issues, breathing issues, this sort of thing. You would need food that does not require preparation, that you could just open a can and eat, or open a package and eat it out of the package. You would need your medicines. You would need, if it were wintertime and it were winter storm, you'd need some alternate source of heating if the electricity fails. Those are the kind of survival things that we should have as part of our personal kit all the time. And I don't mean a room full of it, but one of these Tupperware type boxes that you can buy at Lowe's, one of these plastic 40-quart boxes, and pack that with those type of supplies, enough for your family that lives in your household. And then you tuck it in the back of a closet and you've got it if you need it. And if you go to ready.gov, that's the FEMA website, and it has specific checklists for just those type of items, so that then you're ready for severe weather of any type, not just a tropical issue, because again, you need to get out of the way of that one, but severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, or this sort of thing. You're basically as prepared as you can be for that.
All right, thank you very much. We have been promoting through our e-blast. We have been sharing the link for the South Carolina Hurricane Preparedness booklet. That is updated every year. The new booklet link is on our member website. Myron had shared some information with me about hurricane preparedness. And as we post this recorded video webinar to the member website, we will share some of those additional links underneath. So I think those are all the questions that we have. I appreciate you guys being on. As far as the association, I will say that we do a lot of communicating with the members through email, text, member text, different type of communication. If there is an evacuation, if we're heading towards an evacuation, we as management have an entire management plan. We meet, we get prepared. So, we are working for the community side. as we're preparing for any storms, as you're working to prepare your homes. So we do have a member text system, and I know we have a lot of new members. We'll be sending out an alert on that probably in the next couple of weeks. We'll send out an email letting you know the alert is coming. And if you don't receive the alert, let us know. We can make sure we include your phone numbers in there. Our main source, though, is by email, and we post all those emails to our website so that if you miss an email, you can just log into our website, see what was sent out. I believe through the last storms that we've had, Hurricane Matthew and Irma, we tried very hard to keep everybody engaged of what's going on here. Jim and his staff are boots on the ground and reporting to us that maybe have evacuated so that we can report out to you. So if you have any further questions, you can obviously submit those to me. I can follow up with these gentlemen, but I certainly appreciate you gentlemen participating. I appreciate everybody that logged on and got some information. And if you're missing something, just let us know and we will work hard to get that information to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Take care.